The most respected medicine man of the Sioux delivered his final prophecy with his dying breath. But when nobody believed him, the consequences would test the very survival of his people. In the time when buffalo still darkened the Great Plains like moving thunderclouds, there lived among the Lakota, Sioux a medicine man whose wisdom was legend among all the prairie tribes. His name was Wicahpi, which meant star in the sacred tongue, and like the celestial bodies that guided travelers across the vast grasslands, his visions had never led his people astray. For 73 winters, Wicahpi had served as a spiritual guide for his band, interpreting the signs that dance in smoke and flame, reading the messages written in the flight patterns of birds, and most importantly, receiving the sacred visions that warned of dangers yet to come. His prophecies had saved his people from floods, enemy attacks, and harsh winters that would have destroyed lesser prepared tribes. But as Wicahpi entered his final season on Earth, the visions that came to him grew increasingly disturbing. Night after night, he would wake from dreams filled with images so terrible that even his weathered spirit recoiled from their implications. He saw the great buffalo herds lying dead and rotting under an alien sun. He saw the sacred Black Hills stripped bare and hollowed out like the bones of some massive creature. Most horrifying of all, he saw his own people, the proud Lakota who had roamed free across the plains since time immemorial, confined like animals in spaces too small to contain their spirits. These visions tormented Wicahpi throughout the winter of 1875, as white snow covered the prairie and his people sheltered in their lodges, telling the old stories and preparing for the renewal that would come with spring. But Wicahpi knew, with a terrible certainty that came from true sight, that this would be the last winter the old ways. The medicine man tried to share his visions with the tribal council, hoping that advance warning might help his people prepare for catastrophe he saw approaching. But his prophecy seemed so impossible, so completely contrary to everything the Lakota knew about their relationship with the land and the white settlers, that even his closest friends began to question whether age had finally clouded his spiritual sight. "Uncle," said Chief Red Cloud, using the term of respect reserved for the most honored elders, "you speak of the buffalo disappearing from the earth entirely. But look around you. The herds are as vast as they have ever been. The grass feeds them, they feed us, and the circle continues as it always has. You tell us that the Wasiku will dig great holes in the sacred hills," added Spotted Tail, another respected leader. "But we have treaties with the white government. They have promised that the Black Hills will remain ours forever." Wicahpi felt the weight of his years pressing down on him like stones. How could he make them understand visions that he himself wished were merely the fantasies of an aging mind? "The treaties are words on paper," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen too much. "Paper burns, my children, but the hunger of the Wasiku for gold is like fire itself. It consumes everything in its path." "Gold," laughed Swiftbear, one of the younger warriors. "What do we care for the yellow metal that the white men prize? It cannot feed a family or make arrows. Let them have their shiny rocks." "You do not understand," Wicahpi insisted, his ancient eyes blazing with prophetic fire. "It is not what the gold can do that matters, but what men will do to possess it. They will break every promise, violate every sacred place, destroy every living thing that stands between them and the metal they worship more than life itself." But even as he spoke, Wicahpi could see the doubt in the faces around him. These were good men, wise leaders who loved their people and wanted to protect them. But they had never seen the visions that haunted his dreams, never felt the cold touch of a future where everything they cherished would be swept away like dust before a prairie fire. The council meeting ended with polite thanks for Wicahpi's counsel, but no concrete plans to act on his warnings. The leaders had more immediate concerns, managing the winter food supplies, planning spring hunts, negotiating with neighboring tribes. The distant catastrophe that Wicahpi described seemed less important than the daily challenges of keeping their people fed and safe. As winter gave way to spring, Wicahpi's help began to fail rapidly. The effort of receiving and interpreting such powerful visions had drained his life force, and he could feel his spirit preparing to journey to the land of ancestors. But still the terrible images continued to come, each one more detailed and horrifying than the last. He saw vast machines like metal buffalo tearing across the prairie, leaving behind them scars in the earth that would not heal. He saw the sacred pipe broken and scattered, the sun dance forbidden, the children of his people forced to forget their own language and customs. He saw reservations, a word that would one day be spoken like a curse, where proud warriors would stand in lines waiting for government rations like beggars pleading for scraps. Most devastating of all, he saw the spiritual connection between his people and the land itself being severed, leaving the Lakota adrift in a world where they no longer knew who they were or where they belonged. In his final weeks, Wicahpi made one last desperate attempt to prepare his people for what was coming. He called for a great gathering, inviting not just his own band, but representatives from all the Lakota tribes. If he could not convince the local leaders, perhaps the combined wisdom of all the chiefs might be able to see the truth in his visions. The gathering took place during the moon of red cherries, when the prairie was at its most beautiful and the buffalo herds were thick on the grasslands. Warriors rode in from across the territory, their horses decorated with eagle feathers and their faces painted for ceremony. It was a gathering that celebrated everything powerful and enduring about Lakota culture. But Wicahpi's appearance shocked those who knew him. The once powerful medicine man was now little more than skin and bones, his eyes sunken but blazing with intensity that made even the bravest warriors uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice carried the hollow echo of someone who was already partly in the spirit world. "My children," he began, addressing the assembled chiefs and warriors, "I have called you here because the visions will not let me rest. I have seen the end of our world, and I must speak these truths before I join the ancestors." The crowd grew quiet, sensing the solemnity of the moment. Even those who doubted Wicahpi's recent prophecies respected the man who had guided them through so many trials. "Within 7 winters," Wicahpi continued, his voice growing stronger as he channeled the power of his visions, "the buffalo will be gone from the earth. Not scattered, not hiding, gone. Killed by the millions until only bones remained to mark where the great herds once grazed." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the gathering. The idea was simply too enormous to comprehend. "The Wasiku will find gold in the sacred hills," Wicahpi pressed on, "and they will come like locusts to tear the earth apart. Our treaties will be forgotten, our boundaries erased. We will be driven from our lands and penned like animals in places of their choosing." "Uncle," interrupted Sitting Bull, the great war leader whose own medicine was strong, "these visions are too dark to be true. Surely the Great Spirit would not allow such devastation to befall his red children." Wicahpi turned his burning gaze on Sitting Bull, and for a moment, the younger man felt as if he were looking into the depth of eternity itself. "The Great Spirit grieves for what is coming," Wicahpi said softly, "but has given men free will, and the Wasiku have chosen to worship gold instead of Creator. Their hunger will consume everything in its path, including us." "Then what would you have us do?" demanded Crazy Horse, the fierce warrior whose hatred of white encroachment was already legendary. "Should we strike first? Should we drive them from our lands before they can multiply further?" "No," Wicahpi said, surprising everyone with his answer. "Fighting will only hasten the destruction. The Wasiku are too many, their weapons too powerful. To resist with violence will give them the excuse they need to destroy us completely." "Then we should flee?" asked Red Cloud. "Abandon our sacred lands and seek refuge in the far north?" "There is nowhere to flee," Wicahpi replied sadly. "The Wasiku will spread across the entire continent like a disease. There will be no place left for the old ways." The frustration in the gathering was palpable. If they could not fight, and they could not flee, what options remained? "Then what is the purpose of these visions?" demanded Swiftbear angrily. "Why torture us with knowledge of a future we cannot change?" For the first time in the entire gathering, Wicahpi smiled, an expression that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. "Because," he said, "the visions also show me what lies beyond the darkness. Yes, the old world will end. Our children will be scattered, our languages forgotten, our ceremonies forbidden. But the spirit of our people is stronger than any force the Wasiku can bring against us." He paused, gathering his remaining strength for the most important part of his prophecy. "I see a time, 7 generations after the great dying begins, when our grandchildren's grandchildren will remember who they are. The sacred languages will be spoken again. The ceremonies will be performed. The connection to the land will be restored. And the wisdom we have carried for thousands of years will help heal the wounds that the Wasaka have inflicted upon the earth itself. 7 generations, repeated Sitting Bull quietly. That is nearly 200 years. The healing will be slow, Wicahpi acknowledged, but it will come, and that is why you must not lose hope, even in the darkest times that approach. Everything we are, everything we know, must be preserved somehow, hidden if necessary, but not lost. The old medicine man's voice was growing weaker now, and those closest to him could see that this effort was consuming the last of his life force. Choose carefully who will carry our stories forward, he whispered. Teach them to hide the sacred knowledge where the Wasaku cannot find it, and tell them to watch for the signs of a new beginning. For when the eagle and the condor fly together again, when the buffalo return to the plains, when the sacred sites are protected by law instead of destroyed by greed. And how will we know when this time of renewal has truly begun? Asked a young warrior named Black Elk, whose own spiritual gifts were just beginning to manifest. Wicahpi's eyes found the young man in the crowd, and for a moment, his face blazed with prophetic fire. You will know, he said, when the children of all races begin to dance together in the sacred hoops, when the whites learn to listen to the voices of the land, when the wisdom of the elders is sought by those who once scorned it. That will be the sign that the great healing has begun. With those words, Wicahpi collapsed, his prophecy complete and his life force finally exhausted. He died 3 days later, surrounded by his family and disciples, but his final visions remained a source of controversy and debate throughout Lakota territory. Most of the tribal leaders chose to dismiss the darker elements of Wicahpi's prophecy as the fevered imaginings of a dying mind. How could the mighty buffalo herds simply vanish? How could the numerous and scattered white settlers possibly overwhelm the combined might of all the plains tribes? How could treaties signed with such ceremony and witnessed by so many important men simply be cast aside like worthless paper? But few individuals took Wicahpi's warnings seriously. They began quietly preparing for the catastrophe he had foretold, teaching selected young people to memorize the sacred stories and songs, creating hidden caches of ceremonial objects, and establishing secret networks that could preserve traditional knowledge even if the tribe itself was scattered. One of these believers was Black Elk, the young warrior who had asked about the signs of renewal. Something in Wicahpi's final vision had resonated deep in his own spiritual nature, and he dedicated himself to learning everything he could about the old ways before they were lost. The skeptics did not have long to wait for vindication or disappointment. In the summer of 1874, exactly as Wicahpi had prophesied, gold was discovered in the Black Hills. The news spread like wildfire through the white settlements, and within months, prospectors were pouring into the sacred mountains in direct violation of existing treaties. The Lakota leaders demanded that the government honor its agreements and remove the trespassers, but their protests fell on deaf ears. The hunger for gold was indeed like fire, consuming legal obligations, moral considerations, and solemn promises with equal ease. By 1876, the situation had deteriorated into open warfare. Despite their courage and fighting skill, the Lakota found themselves facing exactly the kind of overwhelming force that Wicahpi had warned them about. The famous victory at the Little Bighorn proved to be only a brief respite in a conflict whose outcome had been determined by the vast numerical and technological superiority of their enemies. The buffalo slaughter began in earnest shortly after the military campaigns ended. Professional hunters, armed with powerful rifles and motivated by the lucrative market for buffalo hides, began systematically destroying the great herds. Within a few years, the animals that had sustained Plains Indian culture for countless generations were reduced to scattered remnants hiding in remote areas. As the buffalo disappeared, the independent way of life that the Lakota had always known became impossible to maintain. Forced onto reservations and dependent on government rations for survival, the once proud warriors found themselves living exactly the kind of confined existence that Wicahpi had seen in his visions. The suppression of traditional religious practices followed quickly. The sun dance was banned, the sacred pipe ceremonies were forbidden, and children were forcibly removed from their families to attend schools where they were punished for speaking their native language or practicing any aspect of their ancestral culture. Those who had dismissed Wicahpi's prophecies as impossible began to understand the terrible accuracy of his spiritual sight. Everything he had foreseen was coming to pass with ruthless precision. But even in the darkest moments of cultural destruction, the words of his final vision provided hope for those who remembered them. Black Elk, now grown into a powerful medicine man himself, made his life's work to preserve the knowledge that Wicahpi had warned might be lost. Black Elk taught selected young people the old ceremonies in secret, hiding the rituals and forms that white authorities would not recognize as religious practices. He worked with anthropologists and ethnographers to record traditional stories and songs, ensuring that future generations would have access to their cultural heritage, even if the living tradition was temporarily broken. Throughout the long, dark period that the Lakota would later call the Time of Forgetting, small groups of dedicated individuals kept the sacred fire burning. They waited, as Wicahpi had instructed, watching for the signs that would herald the beginning of the Great Healing. The first signs began to appear in the middle of the 20th century, when federal laws protecting Native American religious freedom were passed and tribal sovereignty was gradually restored. The buffalo began to return to plains, first in small, carefully managed herds, then in larger populations as conservation efforts expanded. By the end of the century, exactly 7 generations after Wicahpi's death, the signs of renewal were unmistakable. Native languages were being revived in schools and universities. Traditional ceremonies were being performed openly and with official protection. Archaeological sites and sacred places were being preserved rather than destroyed. Most remarkably, the ecological wisdom that had been scorned for over a century was being recognized as essential for healing the environmental damage that industrial civilization had inflicted on the earth. Native American concepts of sustainability, respect for nature, and the interconnectedness of all life were becoming central to global efforts to address climate change and environmental destruction. The great gathering that Wicahpi had envisioned, where children of all races would dance together in sacred circles, became reality as powwows and ceremonial events welcomed participants from many different cultural backgrounds. The prophecy of the eagle and condor flying together was fulfilled as native peoples from North and South America reconnected after centuries of separation. Black Elk lived long enough to see the beginning of this renewal, and in his final years, he often spoke of the accuracy of Wicahpi's vision. The old medicine man saw truly, Black Elk would tell his students. The darkness was terrible, but it was not permanent. Everything he predicted has come to pass, both the destruction and the healing. We are living now in the time of renewal that he promised would come. Today, when Native American spiritual leaders gather to perform the ancient ceremonies, they often honor the memory of Wicahpi, the medicine man whose final prophecy provided hope during the darkest period in their people's history. His vision reminds all who hear it that spiritual sight extends far beyond the immediate present, that even the most devastating changes are part of larger cycles of destruction and renewal, and that those who preserve wisdom through times of darkness become the seeds of future healing. The story of Wicahpi's last prophecy has become a teaching tale for many tribes, demonstrating the importance of listening to spiritual guidance even when it contradicts our immediate desires or challenges our assumptions about the future. And sometimes, when modern Lakota face seemingly impossible challenges, they remember the words of the old medicine man, that the spirit of the people is stronger than any force that can be brought against them, and that those who keep the sacred fire burning to the longest night will be there to welcome the dawn when it finally comes. This is the way of the prophet spirit. This is the way of the Lakota. And this is how one man's final vision became a beacon of hope that guided his people through their darkest hour and into the light of renewal that he had promised would surely come.